Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is episode 8 of the list of lost penguins, today covering the letters J and L. In short, this is looking at books from the Penguins Classics range, specifically this iteration with the cream surrounding and back and the colour coding, but books that have been dropped and have not made it to the latest iteration of Penguin Classics. Before I start today, I want to thank Pat at Book Chat with Pat, who very kindly sent me 3 books from episode F. I can't remember which one that was. Was it episode 5? But we have here 2 from Henry Fielding. Jonathan Wild, his adventure stroke finger pointing at Robert Walpole. We have Henry Fielding's last work, which was actually published posthumously, the journal of a voyage to Lisbon, and one I'm very excited to read because I've not read this and I do like my Gustave Flaubert, Bouvard and Pécuchet. So this is, I think it's supposed to be a little bit more comic, which is not what I'm used to from Flaubert, but that was a very kind thought. Thank you, Pat. Today, however, we're looking at the letter J, and we start with a book. I have been maybe a little unfair to Penguin Classics all the way through this by just castigating them for not continuing to publish works. I think maybe here they may have a point, although this is a very famous person, but probably not famous. Well, actually, yes, he is famous as a writer, but that's probably not what he's most famous for. I'm sure you've heard of Thomas Jefferson. He's some minor statesman from the 18th century, and the work that used to be in Penguin Classics was Notes on the State of Virginia. So this is an extended response to questions from, I believe, a French diplomat, but he expounds upon the state of Virginia, his love for the state. He talks about the flora, the fauna, he talks about the geography, he talks about the government, separation of church and state and individual liberty, and huge doses of white supremacy. I can imagine it being one of those books you read, nodding along, learning something, turning the page and being aghast. Obviously, this is no longer the 18th century. Things have, thankfully, moved on before moving back ever so slightly in recent times, but let's see if we can't sort that out. But yes, maybe they've got a point in dropping this one. No such excuses for them for book number 2, Sarah Orne Jewett, The County of the Pointed Firs and Other Stories. This, I think The County of the Pointed Firs is a novella, or a very short novel, with some stories added to it to bulk out the volume. It's her most famous work. She was a well-known writer at the time. She was in a social circle that included Winnicatha and Alice James, the sister of Henry and William. She was a great and famous exponent of regional literary movements, and her use of the vernacular in books is something which people even now go back to as an example of how to do it. So I haven't read this book, but I'd like to. It's a pity this one's been dropped, but I might keep an eye out for it regardless. For book 3, this is a name I think everyone's heard of, and it's his collected poetry. Though if I was going to describe this writer, poet would be quite far down the list. It's Samuel Johnson, journalist, essayist, lexicographer, novelist. I wouldn't immediately say poet. I haven't read his poems. I can't pass judgment. Somebody let me know if I'm missing out on an absolute treat here. This has all of his English poetry, as I said, and some Latin poetry, and his verse drama, Irene. But I don't think I could give you one line of Johnson's poetry off the top of my head. And even when I'm not familiar or have read lots of a poet, I would at least know a line or a title. I can't think of one for Johnson. But that isn't to say he doesn't have his strength in other areas. Perhaps poetry just wasn't it. Next, however, we have a Uruguayan writer with a French name who wrote French poetry, Jules Laforgue, and I'd never heard of him before finding him on this list and having to say goodbye to him already. He was a French poet. He was a symbolist poet or an impressionist poet, depending on who you ask. Maybe a little bit of a mix of both. He used free verse. He was influenced by Walt Whitman, and he was apparently an influence on characters as diverse as T.S. Eliot and Marcel Duchamp. The poems here are in both French and English translation. More poetry on the chopping block, I'm afraid, and Penguin is a coming in, because we have dropped here late medieval English lyrics and carols from the year 1400 to the year 1530. So late medieval, early Tudor. This book published in the year 2000 and already out of publication. Lots of the poems here are anonymous. Well, we're whizzing through them this week, and there are only 7 books listed this week. But next, book number 6, is Georg Christoph Lichtenberg. And if you've never heard this name, you may have heard of Lichtenberg figures. And if you haven't heard of Lichtenberg figures, you would probably recognise one were you to see it. It is lightning captured in a bottle. It is those forked electrical paths that, I don't know how else you describe them other than they are Lichtenberg figures. But he was a German scientist. He was the first full-time German physics professor. He was also an Anglophile, and this is a book not of science, but of his aphorisms, which were found after his death and published. They were in notebooks hidden away in his desk, I believe. And some of these aphorisms can make me feel very seen, as the kids say. There are very many people who read simply to protect themselves from thinking. A book is a mirror. If an ape looks into it, an apostle is hardly likely to look out. Could be a bit mean, Lichtenberg. And book number 7, the final one to be dropped this week. Are you kidding me? John Locke. The political writings of John Locke. I know he's supposed to be more famous as a philosopher, but these writings I thought were important. I was reading some of these for my A-level, although that is over 30 years ago now. 2 treatises on government was the one I read. This book included that work from the 1680s. It also included 2 tracts on government, which came 20 years before, and an essay concerning toleration. I would have to read them again to decide whether there was any merit in perhaps not continuing with this. Maybe this is just a commercial decision. After all, Penguin is not a government service. They're not beholden to publish these things. I just always considered it nice that they were out there, and I took a little comfort from the fact that I thought other people were reading things like this. Perhaps they just weren't. Anyway, a short video this week. Back next week with the letter M. But until then, bye.